Are you ready? Good. So the next step is to paint any of the details on the gun that you want to stand out. So for example, there's this little lever here that I'm going to base in the metallic pewter paint that I have. And by just using the small brush, I can go in and I can accent what I want. I'm going to go over these little nail heads again with some of the rub and buff, but by coating it with this pewter, which right now doesn't seem to stand out, I'm actually giving it a good base so it'll stand out later when I rub it. But by painting, just putting some of the gray on any of the nail heads, or screw heads, I guess is what they're supposed to be, I can help them stand out on their own anywhere on the gun. And it's just a quick coat, because again, with the rub and buff, I can really make them stand out later. And I can accent them more. So, there's that one. And then the other step too is to make sure that you get everything that is slightly different, the color that you want. And make sure that you paint both sides the same, because the last thing you want is for one side to be completely different than the other, or you've forgotten a detail. So make sure you keep going back to the other side to see what you did on the other side to make sure they match. Now on the clip here, I used rub and buff on the other side, and I used the gold leaf, and just by putting a little bit on my palette, I found that I don't have to use my finger. I actually can use a brush to put on what I want. So, clean brush, and just by dabbing it into the rub and buff, I can go over and control how much I actually put on there. And it doesn't look like at first that I'm doing anything, but if you watch the yellow tone of what it is that I'm doing, you can see that it's actually going on fairly well. And the larger the brush, the more, so for example, I go back to these guys that have a little stiffer bristle, and I can brush along the edges. I can brush along anything that's high, and I can accentuate edges, details, anything that I want really with this rub and buff gold. Okay, so then the other side of the clip, you'll see that it's not as bright and brassy, and that's because on top of it I went ahead and I put, oops, there goes a piece of my gun. I put some of this pewter on top of it. And that helped dull down the shiny quality of the clip. And notice again that I'm not really using any specific brush stroke pattern. And you can really get the paint in and around the grooves and details, because then on top you can use your finger, you can use a piece of paper towel, you can use your cloth, and you can wipe off any of the high spots to make sure that they really stand out. But it's getting the darker paints and the grooves that really sets it apart from everything else. So I could even go in with the black and go in along the edges here, and I can spread it around just like dirt and aging. And just by going in and rubbing just slightly in between the two grooves, we've got ourselves a nice aged look. I can go in along this edge here and just spread it out. I can go in and around here. And really spread it out. But don't be afraid to use your finger. Your finger's your best friend when it comes to blending on here. So there's the clip, slightly aged. And then with some of the glaze that I need to make just a little darker and a little thicker. You don't want it to be too runny, otherwise it will run too much. But by brushing it into the cracks and crevices, we can help accentuate some of that, some of those details. And just lightly rub across, not into the grooves, anything that you want the paint to go into, but you can rub everywhere else. And then you get that nice darker look. So I can do the same thing here in the grooves. And the more paint that you have in the mixture, the more dramatic it's going to be. So you have control over it. You don't have to be shy about it. But you want to work fairly quickly because the paint will start to dry. And then just by rubbing in and around where you painted, you can start to blend any brush strokes that you've used or had left behind. Okay, so I've left quite a bit of paint there, and if I just go in with my finger with the cloth, I can take a little bit more of it away. Okay, and then the pewter again, I went in and I painted inside each of these to help accentuate them a little more. And please make sure to let paint dry before you put on the next layer, otherwise you're just gonna smear paint around. You'd rather have stuff stand out than just be blended away. Okay, so once that's dry, then I can go in with the black again and then really accentuate it. Again, making sure not to have any dominant brush strokes. You don't want anything to look too extreme. Okay.